Chapter 1. The Kingdom of Glass. Arthur Pendleton's world was a universe encapsulated in steel and glass, suspended among the clouds. His office in the penthouse of Pendleton Tower was not merely a workplace. It was a sanctuary, a throne from which he ruled his financial empire. From there, the city stretched out below, a carpet of lights and possibilities, each shorter building a reminder of his meteoric rise. He had conquered it all with a combination of sharp intelligence, relentless ambition, and an unshakable belief that a man's value could be quantified, measured, and ranked on a spreadsheet. That day, like every other, the air was imbued with the expensive silence of efficiency. The almost inaudible hum of the climate control system, the faint whisper of computers, the distant click of a mouse. It was the symphony of his existence. Arthur wore a custom-tailored suit of Italian wool that cost more than many of his employees' cars. It was his armor, a visible symbol of the chasm that separated him from the ordinary world. It was then that his gaze, always searching for imperfections in his perfect world, landed on her, a solitary figure near the vast glass windows capturing the dawn. She was the cleaner, a middle-aged woman with a serene face and hands that worked with a patient cadence. Her name, he vaguely knew from some HR email, was Maria, but to Arthur she was a function, not a person. Yet that morning something made her stand out. Perhaps it was the contrast between the high-tech coldness of the environment and the almost anachronistic simplicity of her tool. In her hands she held not one of the modern silent cleaning machines he had acquired, but an old wooden broom, a vasura with a dark, worn handle and bristles frayed from use. It was an object from another time, an intruder in his future. A smile of disdain curled Arthur's lips. This was more than inefficiency. It was an affront to his very philosophy of progress. He stood up, and the sound of his Italian leather shoes against the polished marble echoed like hammer blows in the sacred silence of the office. Chapter 2. The scorn and the broom. He approached, their shadows crossing on the shiny floor. Still insisting on that relic. His voice was smooth, cutting, laden with an irony he considered wit. He pointed his chin at the broom. That belongs in a museum, not on the floor of a cutting-edge firm. I have machines that use artificial intelligence to map dirt, and you're here pushing dust around with a piece of wood and straw. It's quaint, but it's also an insult to human potential. His eyes then traveled over her clothing, a simple, cheap cotton dress and a pair of worn-out shoes. And the look. My dear, image is everything. You represent this company. Your clothes say, conformity with the mediocre. We must always aspire for more, don't you think? Maria stopped. The constant back-and-forth motion of the broom ceased. She did not shrink back or lower her eyes. Instead, she lifted her face slowly, and her eyes met his. They were a deep brown, and in them there was no fear, no anger, not even irritation. There was a calm so vast and so solid that Arthur felt a sudden chill run down his spine. It was the calm of a mountain observing an ant. A small smile so subtle it could have been a shadow touched her lips. It was a smile that did not invite conversation, but that sealed a silent judgment. Without a word, she inclined her head, almost imperceptibly, and returned to her work. The soft swish-swish of the broom resumed its rhythm, but now the sound seemed different. It seemed measured, deliberate, as if each movement was sweeping away not just the dust, but Arthur's arrogant presence as well. A wave of hot frustration rose in Arthur's chest. Her indifference was a greater challenge than any insult. He let out a short, harsh laugh, a forced sound that felt false in his own ears. Suit yourself, he muttered, turning on the expensive soles of his shoes. Keep living in the past. He returned to his desk, but the tranquility of his morning had been shattered. The image of that broom and that unshakable calm remained in his mind, an irritating stain on his consciousness. Chapter 3. The Growing Shadow. In the days that followed, Arthur tried to ignore the incident, attributing it to the eccentricity of a simple person. He threw himself even deeper into his work, into aggressive negotiations and the pursuit of the next big deal that would solidify his legacy. His current project was the acquisition of Neuralink Inc., a startup promising to revolutionize the logistics sector. He had invested heavily, leveraging assets and convincing his shareholders to do the same. It was a bold move, the kind of risk he loved, believing his vision was infallible. But amid the projected profit charts and optimistic reports, a small shadow of doubt began to form. Sometimes, at the end of the day, when the office was empty and silent, he would see Maria arriving for the night shift. He watched her furtively through the glass door of his office. She always moved with the same deliberate calm, her old broom an extension of her arm. There was a dignity in her movements, a kind of peace he could not comprehend. It was a peace his success had never given him. He would sometimes see her stop near an ornamental plant and adjust a leaf with a gentle touch, or clean the frame of a photograph with a care bordering on reverence. And that broom. He began to notice small details. The wooden handle was dark, but not from paint. It was the sheen of countless hours of contact with human hands. There was a small mark, a kind of carving near the base that seemed intentional. A symbol, an initial. His curiosity, an instinct he normally reserved for financial spreadsheets, was piqued, much against his will. Chapter 4. The Collapse. The collapse began not with a bang, but with a whisper. An email from a junior analyst signaling an anomaly in Neuralink's demo data. Arthur ignored it. Then came an article on an obscure tech blog, questioning the veracity of the core algorithms. Arthur scoffed, considering it envy. But the whispers became murmurs, then voices, and then an uproar. The truth came out like a toxic leak. Neuralink's core technology was a sham, a house of cards built on plagiarized code and staged demos. The company's value evaporated overnight. The stocks of Arthur's conglomerate plummeted in a spiral of panic. The phones rang non-stop, furious shareholders, hungry journalists, lawyers. The air in his office, once charged with power, was now heavy with the smell of fear. Arthur watched his empire, built with so much effort, crumble. His fortune, which he believed to be a rock, revealed itself to be quicksand. Confidence, the most valuable currency in his world, had evaporated. He found himself sitting in his expensive leather chair, looking out at the city, but now the light seemed to mock him. He was a king without a kingdom, a general without an army. Bankruptcy was not just a financial possibility, it was an existential annihilation. Chapter 5. The Thread of Hope. It was amid this despair that his board chairman, a man named Alistair Finch, whose loyalty Arthur was beginning to suspect was directly tied to cash flow, called an emergency meeting. "There is a possibility, Arthur," Finch said, his face pale. "A single possibility." "Speak," Arthur growled, his voice hoarse from sleepless nights. "It's an investor. Private, very discreet, almost a myth. They call themselves the Anchor." Arthur frowned. "The Anchor? Never heard of them." "Few have. They don't seek publicity. They emerge in times like these when the foundations are crumbling. They say their wealth, well, it's not of recent origin. It's old. It's deep. They can rescue us, Arthur, completely. But the price will be high, and the meeting will be on their terms." A spark of hope, faint and fragile, ignited within Arthur. It was all he had. "Schedule it. Schedule whatever is necessary." The meeting place was a private apartment in a historic building in the heart of the city. a place Arthur had always considered antiquated and unimportant. There was no signage, just a heavy, solid oak door. The interior was a time capsule. The air smelled of old leather, beeswax, and aged paper. Mahogany bookshelves from the colonial era held leather-bound volumes. It was a world of silence and shadows, a stark contrast to the bright transparency of his own realm. Chapter 6. The Revelation. Arthur was led into a library. A single desk lamp spilled a cone of golden light onto a solid wood meeting table. He sat down, feeling small and insignificant. His hands, normally steady, trembled slightly. He mentally rehearsed his pitch, his last, desperate attempt at salvation. The door behind his chair opened without a sound. He turned, and the world, as he knew it, disintegrated. She stood in the doorway, Maria, the cleaner, but she was and was not the same woman. The simple dress was replaced by a pearl-grey linen tailleur, cut with a precision that screamed haute couture without needing to say a word. Her hair, once tied in a simple bun, now fell in soft waves over her shoulders. She wore no jewelry, except for a single antique brooch on her lapel, a piece that seemed familiar to Arthur, but which he couldn't place. Her posture was different, erect, centered, imbued with an authority that was as natural as breathing. But it was her eyes that destroyed him. They still held that same deep, impenetrable calm, but now, without the context of the cleaning uniform, that calm was overwhelming. It was the gaze of someone who owned the very ground under everyone's feet in the room. She walked to the head of the table and sat down, her movements fluid and economical. She did not smile. She simply stared at him, and Arthur felt completely naked, his debts, his desperation, his arrogance, all exposed under that tranquil gaze. "Mr. Pendleton," she said. Her voice was the same, but the tone was different. It was soft, but every word was carved from diamond. "You laughed at my broom." Arthur couldn't speak. His mouth was dry. "You laughed," she continued, "because you saw an object, a piece of wood and straw. You are a man who reduces the world to its components, aren't you? Cost, value, profit. You saw the tool and believed you understood the craftswoman. You saw the clothes and believed you understood the woman." She leaned forward slightly, and the lamplight caught the glint in her eyes. "That broom, Mr. Pendleton, has been in my family for 5 generations. My great-great-grandfather, a carpenter, made it for his wife when they arrived in this country with nothing but the clothes on their backs and hope in their hearts. This broom has swept the shops they opened, the factories they built, the houses that became homes. This broom swept away the dust after the crash of '29 and was there to sweep up the confetti when our businesses survived and thrived. This carving here," she said, touching her thumb to a specific point on the handle, "is my great-grandmother's initial, carved by her own hand. This is not a relic of poverty, Mr. Pendleton. It is the scepter of my lineage. It is a reminder that true wealth is not what you display, but what you preserve. True fortune is not what you have in the bank, but what you carry in your soul." Arthur sat paralyzed. Each word was a hammer beating against his foundations. "And my clothes," she said, her gaze fixed on him. "You called them conformity with the mediocre. They were a daily tribute to my mother, who taught me that character isn't bought in boutiques, that humility is not weakness, but the deepest form of strength. You boasted that you could buy 100 machines. My family's fortune, the true patrimony you scorned because you couldn't see it, is so vast that we could buy your company, your tower, and the entire street it stands on, in cash, without our net worth even fluctuating. You were so busy measuring others' value by the shine of their shoes that you forgot to see the solidity of the ground under their feet." She paused, allowing every syllable to echo in Arthur's devastated soul. "You laughed at my broom. You mocked my apparent poverty. But I wasn't hiding my wealth from you, Mr. Pendleton. I was protecting it from people like you, because true patrimony doesn't need validation. It just is. Chapter 7. The Silence That Remains. There was nothing more to say. Arthur did not make his presentation. He did not ask for the rescue. He simply stood up, his legs shaky, and walked out of the room without looking back. The humiliation he had felt in the office was nothing compared to the complete annihilation he experienced now. He had not just underestimated a woman, he had failed to comprehend the very meaning of value. His wealth was a house of cards blown over by the first strong wind. Hers was the mountain that weathered the storm. He walked the streets, a ghost of a man. The city lights, once symbols of his conquest, were now just lights. The sound of his footsteps was the sound of a world collapsing. He had laughed at the broom, the symbol of a legacy he could never buy or comprehend, and in return had watched his own fragile patrimony be swept into the dustbin of history. Arthur's company went bankrupt. The tower was sold. He disappeared from the world he had so despised. And Maria, the guardian of the true patrimony, continued her work, not out of necessity, but by choice. Because she understood that the most valuable wealth was not power over others, but peace within oneself. And sometimes in the dead of night, the soft, rhythmic swish-swish of her broom on the marble sounded like a gentle yet relentless reminder that some things, character, legacy, dignity, are impervious to scorn and unshakable by greed. He laughed at my broom until he saw my true fortune.